Hi, everyone. Mike Malatesta here, and welcome back to the How Did Happen podcast. On this podcast, I dig in deep with every guest to explore the roots of their success, to discover not just how it happened, but why it matters. My mission is to find and share stories that inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you.
We're not talking about a civil war here and rising up against the government and all this crap. We're talking about a war on evil. And there are so many good people that are willing to stand up and say, you know what? We're going to do a revolution against trafficking. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do a revolution against whatever this evil is that's happening to our children in our own homes. That's how this problem is fixed. That's the reason we put so much time and money and focus into creating the movie. And we are so grateful that there's a massive movement of people that are standing up and spreading this message.
Hey, Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you taking the time to have me on.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. I heard you first on Dave Will's EO360 podcast. Dave is a good friend of mine. And I tell you, the thing that got my attention first was the Bridge Investment Group thing, because my wife and I happen to be investors in Bridge. So as soon as I heard that name, I was like, oh, I know that name, familiar with that. But that was that's only a very small part of your story. And folks, for those of you listening, I gave you a taste of what we talked about today, but now I'm going to give you a little bit more information about Paul so you can get as excited as I am about this podcast. So Paul Hutchinson, over a period of 10 years, Paul has led and played a key part in over 70 undercover rescue missions to liberate trafficked children. The horrific reality of combating the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world motivated Paul to use all his available resources to eradicate this evil from the earth. Even as I read that sentence, Paul, my skin is crawling a little bit. That is so disturbing. The fastest growing criminal enterprise.
Yeah. That's why the movie's doing so well. People are like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. They got to be like, wow, in a really weird, like just smack across the head with a baseball bat. Wow. Anyway, let me continue. So after a decade of child rescue missions, which by the way, we're going to talk about, it's super fascinating, Paul realized that the only way to fix the problem is to take away the demand, which is icky. If we could turn back the clock and help the perpetrators heal before they ever passed on their trauma to others, we would save millions of children. Paul is the founder of the Child Liberation Foundation and Liberate Humanity. He has received a ton of doctorate and other degrees. If you go to his LinkedIn page or his website, which is it official, paulhutchinson.com? Or
Paul Hutchinson Official. Yeah, paulhutchinsonofficial.com. Uh-huh.
Okay. And that's all Paul's socials as well, as far as I know. If you go there, you will see, I didn't want to embarrass you by reading through all of them, and you probably heard them so many times, but there is so many things there, including being knighted and all other kinds of things. Super cool. Here's what Paul referenced. He's the executive director of the Sound of Freedom movie, which just recently came out last weekend. We're July 12th, 2024. So last weekend, it was the highest grossing film is it United States? In the nation?
Yeah, probably in the world, because the U.S. kind of leads all those movies. But the numbers came out here in the U.S.
And just for reference, folks, the new Indiana Jones movie came out last weekend. So if you can just imagine that. That's so amazing. The film highlights one of the largest child rescue missions in history, with over 120 victims being liberated. And Paul's role in the rescue is played by the producer of the film, which is Eduardo. How do you say the last name?
Verostegui.
Eduardo
Verostegui, yeah.
And that rescue mission in Colombia set the course of Paul's lifetime focus on helping real humanity. And prior to all this relatively insignificant work that Paul's doing, he was a co-founder of Bridge Investment Corporation and Bridge Investment Group Partners. Bridge is publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange and has more than $48 billion under management. So, Paul, I start every podcast with the same simple question, and that is, how did it happen for you?
I decided that it would.
Okay.
From an early age, I decided that I was going to make a powerful, positive impact in the lives of others. I knew that I had one life to live, and and I was going to do the best, or at least I was brought here for a purpose, whether that was 100 lives or one life or whatever. But I knew that I had a great mission. And as a young child, I wanted to be a brain surgeon. And then I changed that to surgeon. I realized that the mind, I could heal the world, but then I realized later that healing the heart was really the key to healing the mind. And so fast forward, I got in a major car accident, severed the tendons in my hand, didn't know if I'd have the ability to be a surgeon. They said, you could be a regular doctor. I said, I don't want to be a regular anything. I said, the reason I wanted to be a surgeon is I wanted to specialize and really, and I wanted to be a pediatric cardiologist. I wanted to be a heart surgeon on children. But fast forward, I changed my major to business and finance. And the answer to the riddle on how to become successful in business, how to make a massive impact in the world, the charity side, everything else, was actually a meeting I had in my early 20s, where I was introduced to a man by the name of Jerry Prine. Jerry had never graduated from elementary school. He read on a third grade level, but he was the inventor of countless medical devices, the original software that Siri voice recognition was built upon. And he said, Paul, he said, you could have an IQ at 200 if you wanted. And I'm like, no, I don't think you can change your IQ. He goes, no. He said, the difference between me and you is that I listen better than you. I said, you listen better than me? And I put my hand to my ear. And he said, no, I listen better than you. And he put his hand on his heart. He said, when you realize that we were all born with the ability to feel and recognize that spirit of truth, and you learn to follow it, it will guide you in your life in ways you can't imagine. And so I really took that to heart and started really tuning in to what my life mission would be, and even building a successful company by listening. After you've identified what those goals were, I was able to put together a power team of people who created a massive success in the business. However, my greatest success in my life was not financially. The thing that I point to as my greatest success is my number one, my family in those relationships, but number two, my philanthropic work. I realized a long time ago that if I worked really hard at my business goals, I had decent results. But if I worked really hard and tried to have a powerful, positive impact in the lives of others, then my business goals would just blossom. They would just blow up. And you can call it karma, you can call it God, you can call it whatever you want to. There's a higher power very interested in us doing good and making a positive impact in the world. And so yes, from some degree, my philanthropic work was somewhat selfish because I had so many amazing blessings that came in my life because of my focus on charity work. And so I served on many different boards of different of child-related charities. I helped to raise the money for the aquarium in Utah, and I served with the One Life at a Time and the Ronald McDonald House. I helped with that. I was on the Make-A-Wish board of directors for 7 years, which was a beautiful experience, beautiful organization. But after 7 years, I was the incoming chairman in our area in Make-A-Wish when I got a phone call from our attorney general, and he said, "Paul," he said, "I know you've been very involved in child-related charities." He said, "I need to talk to you about something." He said, "It's the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world, and good people don't know that it's happening." I said, "Really? What are we talking about?" He said, "I'm talking about human trafficking." He said, "In particular right now, I want to talk to you about child trafficking." I'm like, like people selling children? Like for what? I couldn't even imagine that would be happening. And he said, "Paul," he said, "there's more today." And I'm not talking about just children being abused at home, which is horrible and huge. He said, "I'm talking sold human beings. There's more today than all 300 years of the transatlantic slave trade put together." And he introduced me to a Homeland Security agent who had identified some children in Latin America that he wanted to rescue, but his boss wouldn't authorize the operation and wouldn't give him the money. And so he needed to pull together some investors to help make that happen. So we introduced him some of my people, and I helped as well. And Glenn Beck helped as well, some other really great people. And then a few weeks later, he called me and he said, Paul, he said, I'm in Cartagena, Colombia. There's not just 20 children here. There's more than 50. And there's more than 100 children in the surrounding areas that are tied to similar trafficking rings. He said, we believe we can rescue all of these children on the same day at the same time. And this is the premise of where the movie came from, the Sound of Freedom movie. And your listeners can go and watch it on, we're over 2,000 theaters, and we're packed every day. It's the #1 grossing film in America right now of these new releases. And so the real backstory is, he said, I believe we can rescue all 100 children. I said, great. I said, how can I help? I said, you need me to write a check? He goes, no, I need you. Can you be in Colombia in 2 days? He said, the head trafficker down here has an island he wants to develop into a child brothel sex resort, similar to a Jeffrey Epstein type of a thing. He said, we know he's connected with all these other traffickers. What we need you to do is fly in, meet with him, convince him you're willing to fund his project under one condition. He has to have a party for you and your buddies within a couple weeks, bringing all of the children that he has control over. And if you're happy with that party, then you'll fund his project. This is how we were getting him to bring all the children together at the same time so we could rescue them all. And it ended up being the largest child rescue mission in one day in history that I know of at the time. 127 children. And so that's the background and where the name came from. I was there. I won't go into all the details, but we could hear a bunch of the children crying, and it was just heart-wrenching seeing these children that were being brought in, and we put them in a separate part of the house, and the agents came and stormed the party and arrested everybody. The Child Protective Services people came in with the children, and they started laughing and to just settle the children down, singing with these kids. And that sound of freedom was the most beautiful sound that I ever heard.
I imagine.
And I turned to the Attorney General and I said, bro, I spent my whole life making rich people richer. I said, I want to make a difference. I want to, what do you need? Can I write you a check? And he said, Paul, unfortunately, the majority of demand for this horrible act in second and third world countries comes from wealthy, connected business owners and celebrities, people like you. He said, I can't teach my Navy SEALs how to wear a $4,000 suit and a $50,000 watch and negotiate a multi-million-dollar deal. He said, and I don't know of any successful business owners who's had the training that you've had. He said, if you're willing to be the bait, I'll change your whole life. And so that was my first of now 70 undercover rescue missions. I had no social media, no interviews, nothing for the last 10 years because that's where my focus was. We needed that Homeland Security agent went public on CNN, ABC, and he's been kind of the face of a lot of those rescues. But a lot of the behind the scenes heroes were a lot of these Navy SEALs and Green Berets and guys that I worked with on these operations. So that's a quick history of where we are from here. And then you as a host can kind of take us where your audience wants to go deeper on any of those issues.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take you where I want to go, if that's okay.
That works, Mike.
So, I mean, you sort of glossed over that as if that was something that wasn't an extraordinary ask of you. I mean, you're a business person. You're running you're co-running a big, very large company. You're serving on all these boards. You're philanthropic. You have an interest in child causes or charities that support. That's a heck of a long way, Paul, from being asked to basically be an undercover agent in this. That's a long way from being an undercover agent. So I want to know, or I would really like to know, when you were asked, how did you process that? First of all, how did you process it with your family and stuff? And then how did they get you ready to get into this situation? I mean, you said, yes, you've had a lot of big meetings in your life and done a lot of deals, but seems a little different.
Right.
So Tell us how that happened.
Two or three things. First
Yeah.
of all, the Attorney General knew that I had taken a lot of courses and training on hand-to-hand combat, and I was super efficient with the weapons, et cetera. I've taken courses on edged weapons training and improvised weapons training and on Krav Maga and all of these things. Number one. Number two, he was in a meeting with me more than a year before that, where a representative at a charity that we were working with was from the Pentagon, used to be a recruiter for the CIA, watched me after 4 days. He and I and Sean were sitting down, and he said, Mr. Hutchinson, I've as you know, I've been a recruiter for over 20 plus years with CIA. He said, I've been watching you for the last 3 days, and I think your country could use your talents. And I'm like, well, what talents are those? And
Right.
he said, about 1 in every 12 million have a true chameleon ability to go in. And he said, I saw you in seconds break down the barrier of communication, become best friends with a bum on the street, a billionaire, and a runway model. And they wanted me to go in and do some undercover work in Dubai with some dirty money guys. And I actually turned them down. I didn't want to put my life in danger. Fast forward more than a year later, when Sean Reyes was in a meeting with, I wasn't there, but I was told the story, with Josh Romney and Tim Ballard and others. And Tim was saying, hey, I need to find somebody who can play this role. I want to go public. I want to be my face out there. And so I need somebody who can play this role. And Sean Reyes said, oh, well, have you ever met Paul Hutchinson? And purportedly, Josh Romney said, oh, Paul would be perfect. And I told him later, I don't think that's a compliment. You guys both think that I'd be a good undercover pedophile? You know, what is that about?
Or that you're a chameleon who can basically,
exactly
tell anybody anything and they believe you, right? It's kind of scammy, right?
Exactly. I said, I don't know that's a compliment there, but then is what happened when I got that call from the Homeland Security agent. He said, Paul, I'm here in Colombia and I have these children. And I'll answer your question this way. I got a call an hour later from my business partner, John Pennington. He was the co-founder of Bridge Investment Group with me. And John said, Paul, I heard from Don what you just agreed to on your phone call about going to Colombia. He said, have you thought this through?
Mm.
He said, this is really dangerous. This is, I mean, he said, you're set. You could sell out today, buy an island, be happy the rest of your life. And I said, John, would I really be happy if I bought an island, if I bought a yacht, if I bought some jets? What would that make me happy? I said, and tell me this, if I was doing something else dangerous tomorrow, if I was climbing Everest tomorrow, you and I would have the same conversation. He goes, yeah, we probably would. I said, and when I'm 95 years old and I'm looking back on my life and I say, I climbed this mountain and I built this multi-billion-dollar company and I helped rescue this many children from slavery, which of them matters at all? He said, you're right. He said, if your skills can be used to help find these children, then you should go. And asking to help fund that mission isn't what changed my life. Mike, the thing that changed my life was there's a little girl that's depicted in the movie. They called her Princess. The traffickers called her Princess when they're introducing her to me. She's kind of the main theme of the movie and trying to find this little girl. But in the real story, they had shown me this picture of this little girl in my first meeting, this little 11-year-old. Being sold for the first time, scared to death. And the thing that changed my life forever is sitting at this quote party when the traffickers bring out these children and this little girl standing in front of me, scared to death. Her makeup was running because she was scared and she was crying. She was shaking. She was looking at me like I was that monster. And I everything in me wanted to just say, I'm not that guy. You're going to see your parents again.
Right. She had no idea. Yeah.
She had no idea that we were the good guys. And she was looking at me with that fear in her eyes. And I made a commitment at that moment to myself, to that little girl, and to God. that I would do everything in my power to eradicate that from the face of the earth. There wasn't anything more evil than I could think of than that little girl being sold in that way. And so since that time, I have led or played a key part in over 70 undercover rescue missions in 15 countries.
And
That's what changed my life.
Do those 15 countries include the United States?
We have operators in the U.S. now. For a long time, when I was doing undercover, we had some of the foundations that I had helped to fund that were funding operations here in the U.S. I went on a couple stings with the Attorney General office and whatnot here, but the deep cover was in second and third world countries because of the fact that that's where my role fit the best. It was these Americans that were going down, wealthy guys going down, putting on these big parties or whatever else. And so yes, we did have some pushback in the beginning from some agencies in the US that were like, hey, this is our job. We don't need help from charity organizations. But in these foreign countries, we would go in, and before, they would kind of butt heads with the US agency saying, this is our job, don't get in our way. But we could come in as a private foundation and say, listen, we will work with you. We will work under your laws. We will report to you. We will pay for everything. We will do all the work. We will present these guys. You take that down, the takedown. Your people will think you're heroes because they won't even know we're involved. They'll think that we got arrested with these bad guys. And in doing so, it allowed us to have some beautiful synergy with the federal police in these different countries.
But even as you were doing that, because you mentioned in the Colombia example that you had the SEALs with you, and did you always have U.S. service protection?
Not active. So these SEALs, these Navy SEALs, private. They're all retired.
Okay.
So yeah, we now on the Colombia rescue, what had happened is we had my guys at my party were former Navy SEALs, Green Berets. They were operators. We had a bunch of CTI agents, which were the Colombian federal agents that some of them were undercover. There are maids and our waiters, our cooks, and a bunch of them to storm the island at the right time. And then those guys were our guys watching us. And then an outside perimeter, we did have some U.S. government assets that were watching simply because the Homeland Security agent had just retired from his job and he still had some connections there, et cetera. Okay. So they were watching them. But in a lot of these operations, we don't work with active U.S. assets. We have retired ones that are there helping us.
And how, Paul, did you create a persona for yourself that was believable? And I get that you can act like act like a rich guy because you are, that's what you are. But how did I'm assuming they check you out.
Yeah. So first things first, and this is actually a funny story. I on the very first mission, this might worry you as an investor in Bridge, but on that very first mission, when Tim called and said, "Hey, I need you here in Colombia in 2 days," I didn't have time to set up a profile. I went down as Paul Hutchinson, right? So these guys looked me up online and saw my background and I didn't have a big social media profile. I had a little bit online, but they looked online and saw, that I was the founder, all this stuff. And so that gave all the credibility they needed to bring in all of these children, which ended up being what the movie was about. Fast forward, after that mission, when I was asked to continue and go doing deep cover work, I told my personal assistant, I said, Kitty, I need all of everything online about the real me taken down. I talked to the board of directors, told them I'm taking my face down from Bridge. I'll still be here. I'll still raise the money. I'll still, help out in the investment committees, all of that stuff, but I can't have my face online anymore. And then I removed everything on my social media, my Facebook, my Instagram, all of these things, removed all of that, and then set up a fake profile. In fact, I became Paul Stone. In fact, the story of how I became that was funny. So I told my assistant, Kitty, I said, listen, going undercover, I need to have different persona. There's hundreds of millions of Pauls in the world, and so I want to stay as Paul. That's not a big deal, but I can't be Paul Hutchinson. So I'll set up a new profile under Paul Johnson instead. And she's sitting there typing, and she stops and she looks up at me and she said, "You have a chance to redefine yourself, and you're going to be Paul Johnson." She said, "How about Paul Stone?" And she types that out.
Nice.
So we put together this fake profile under Paul Stone. In the first profile, I was the rich guy. I had a bunch of pictures with me in front of Ferraris and Lamborghinis and yachts and stuff that I didn't ever put on my social media because I didn't want to piss guys off,
Mm-hmm.
But it was a great persona for this playboy that was going down there for these things. So she put all of that up online. We had some guys build a fake web page for me, a Paul Stone Capital, and all of this stuff, so that I would be this guy that was a real estate guy, because that's what I knew in these missions and whatnot. And so Paul Stone Capital is what they put together. And I had business cards, I had phone numbers, I had all of this stuff. And a few of these operations got super dangerous. And if I didn't have all of that new stuff memorized, I wouldn't be here today. And that's a whole other story of some of those undercover operations where it got pretty dicey. But that's what we did in setting up those social media profiles.
Thank you for that. And were there any of these 70, like I'm assuming that there's a lot of coordination, like somebody has to make the connection with these people. Someone has to introduce you. You got to set up all the things you talked about, all the people, the perimeter, the situation itself. What's involved in doing this?
So the first year as Paul Stone, the foundation we were working with at the time had guys that would go in deep cover, and they would connect on the ground at 2 a.m. in downtown, in Acapulco, and connect with the guys who were selling the children there. And then they would show them my profile. And these are former CIA guys and narc guys and guys who had a lot of experience in that space. They would show them my profile. These guys would look at my web page. They would look at my social media. They'd go, "Oh, wow, yeah, that guy is the guy that we're looking for." So then they would bring out their children for this party, so to speak. I would fly in, and they would have a quick meeting many times with them. We had coordination with the federal agents that were there undercover to make sure that I was safe. I was picked up at the airport, usually by former Navy SEALs and Green Berets that were my real bodyguards and my show bodyguards, so to speak. And then everything would be all pre-coordinated, where we had a place for the party, so to speak. We would have undercover cameras that were there, that were set up so that the children never had to stand trial and witness. We had the bad guys saying exactly why that's a dark conversation, Mike.
Yeah.
When we have to on camera have these guys tell us exactly why the children were there, what they were willing to do, how much they cost, and all of this stuff. That's what we used as evidence, turning it in. Now, fast forward after a little over a year of doing that deep cover or the undercover work as Paul Stone, it was decided that the foundation we were working with at the time was concerned that it was too dangerous to be having some of their guys under the foundation doing that deep cover work. And so they wanted me and my team to start doing that, 2 a.m. downtown Mexico City, those kind of operations. So I changed my persona from Paul Stone to Paul Steele, because Paul Stone, that would be super dangerous for this guy with all of this money to be 2 a.m. I instead began working for a wealthy boss. And so I would go in with these guys. And so the majority of my missions for the last 10 years, I was actually deep cover. I was 2 a.m. downtown Port-au-Prince, Haiti, connecting with the worst people you can imagine that were selling these children, telling them that my boss is coming in a few weeks, and we're going to put together an event with him on his yacht or on the beach or whatever else. And that's where we would rescue all the children.
Okay. So you became the supposed liaison between them and so 2 a.m, these dark meetings, it's like you're just stepping in further. Like, it's one thing what you described in Colombia. You go there, you do it. Now you're basically putting yourself, you're putting yourself at risk there. Now you're
super dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me what's going through your mind when you show up at these places. And can you give me an example of like something that just went really wrong without you getting injured, of course, but just like, holy crap, how'd I get out of that one?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of those, a lot of them. Many times the traffickers who were selling these children were escaped convicts from the U.S. that went across the border, that went into Dominican Republic, went into Haiti, went into Mexico, went into Peru, wherever. And it's amazing how many times the kingpin in those areas was former fugitive in the U.S. that was abroad and selling these kids. And so that makes it dangerous by itself. I had one situation where I had met with this trafficker, and he's like, he was obvious king of this entire region. Everybody was cowering to him. He has shown us some children, and he calls me and he said, Pablo, I have to meet you. I'm like, okay, let's meet. And when we meet, I say, you're going to go show me, because I tell them each, I say, listen, my boss will kill me and my whole family if I taste the candy before the party, but I have to verify that you have it. So I'll give you $100 for each one. This way we can get eyes on the kids. They will take us to where they're holding them so that they can get that $100 for each one that we can see. We can geotag that location so the feds can go in and do this thing there instead of having to bring the kids out or whatever else. So if we can get them to take us to where they have the kids, or bring those children out where we can tag their car and have the federal agents follow them, that's really the key. And so he calls me and he goes, Pablo, he said, we meet. He goes, I'm the king, right? I said, yeah, I know I said, what do you mean? He goes, I'm the boss. I said, oh yeah, you're the boss of this whole area. He said, every boss has a boss, and I'm going to take you to see my boss. And so we go in, and this guy is man in charge. He's got $2,000 shoes on. I can see multiple guys with eyes on us with guns that were behind that tree, behind that building, et cetera. And the conversation got pretty heated, and he demanded $2,000 before we even get things started. I didn't have the cash there, went back to the safe place, brought him back out, and I'm paying out this cash to him because he's the kingpin that's going to set this. That's going to set up the event, connect us to all the other traffickers, et cetera. And then he said, he goes, give me your business card. I'm like, okay, pull out my card and I give it to him. Holding my business card of my Paul Steele undercover, right? He holding my business card. He says, what is your phone number? Smart guy, right? Boom. I gave him my phone number, that my undercover one, I had it memorized. He goes, what's your address? Boom. And then he says, pull out your phone. Show me your phone. And I show him my phone. He takes his phone and dials that address. Dials the phone number that's on there. If I didn't have my undercover phone number matched up with my iPhone so it would ring everything, we would be dead right there. He dials my number. Boom. It rings on my phone. He smiles. He goes, I like you. He goes, let me show you. And he takes us over to, he had this black truck that was lowered with these rims, and he opens up the doors, and there's these 3 children in there, scared to death. This guy ended up bringing 24 children. And one of them was this, that he was connected with, was this 13-year-old American girl that was traveling with her sister and taken in by the traffickers. So anyway, there's, that was super dangerous, and it's happened a lot. Yeah. Now, answer to your question, how I'm feeling, and this isn't a religious thing. This is just a deal I have with my creator. I feel safer in those situations than I do sitting in my office in Salt Lake City. I believe wholeheartedly that I think that God looks down at what we're doing in business. He's all right, you adults deal with that. He sees what's happening with these children and says, no way. If I've got good people willing to do the work, I'm going to pave the way. And I felt that every single time. Felt that barrier of protection because we were in the darkest recesses of hell, pulling these children out.
How do you square that? How do you square that thinking with, if that were true, and I'm not questioning your thinking, but if that were true, why so many of these people are doing this kind of thing?
Well, God doesn't take away, he doesn't take away our free choice.
Yeah.
Everybody has that. Everybody's got free choice. And see, and that's what my new mission is, Mike.
Yeah.
From here on, for the last 10 years, we were pulling 10, 20 children out at a time and rescuing these kids. And I looked at the numbers the end of last year, the beginning of this year, and I realized there's more children being sold today than there was 10 years ago. So if my goal was to eradicate child trafficking, I wasn't doing a very good job. Right?
Where does that kind of data come from, Paul? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but where does that kind of data?
There's just a bunch of online, estimates and stuff. It's hard to really find it. I mean,
that's what I was thinking. It'd be you can't get anyone to say, "Oh, yeah, I've got 1,000 people." Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. These are online estimates of things that are growing. And those numbers range from, 8 million, 10 million, 12 million, whatever else. This is just children in this type of slavery. There's hundreds of millions that are in underage work camps and things like that. But this kind of slavery. Yep. And I took a step back and I said, okay, if every time we're pulling 20 children out of hell, we're creating a vacuum because there's still a demand there, I need to figure out this demand side. I've got to figure that out. If that, and I realized that in doing that, I was done. I was done doing undercover. I needed to focus my energy on creating awareness and fixing the demand. And so for a long time, I thought that the demand was coming from hardcore pornography addictions, where somebody, got super addicted. They want something harder to have that same fix. And for some of them, harder is a little bit younger. Pretty soon they're fantasizing about things they wouldn't have even thought was attractive 5 years ago. I've realized that even that is a symptom. That's a symptom of a much bigger problem. And the bigger problem is this. Literally 1 in every 4 women in the world have been a victim of sexual violence as a child. Roughly 40 to 50% of women at some time in their life, but 1/4 of all women as a child. In fact, men, it's a little bit lower. It's about 1 in every 5 have been a victim at some time in their life. But of those, 25% of them, roughly 200 million men on this planet, it was under the age of 10 years old. So here's what's happening, Mike, in a nutshell. We've got generational trauma that is creating these illicit behaviors. So somebody doesn't just grow up in a healthy home and a healthy mind and healthy everything else and just decide he's going to go to Colombia and participate as a pedophile. There's some kind of trauma going on there. And for a long time, I would sit in front of these traffickers and everything in me wanted to just find a gun and just take them out, right? They're wasting my oxygen. But then I realized if I could have if I had a choice between a gun or a time machine, I would actually take the time machine and take them back a year, 5 years, 10 years before they ever hurt a child and figure out what the crap was going through their mind, what kind of trauma that was unresolved that they were dealing with themselves. Here's the numbers, Mike, of all of the people who have experienced that kind of trauma as children, most of them in their own home. 2/3 of them, God bless them, they're figured out. They're a good husband, good father, good. But 1 out of 3 become contact offenders themselves. So
1 out of 3,
as 1 out of 3, and they're not just abusing one child, right? It's upwards of 100 children sometimes. And so this is a massive explosion in the number of people each generation who have experienced that kind of trauma. So if we can say, okay, yes, once you've raped a child, you are wasting my oxygen, right? You're done. Go to jail. Don't ever get in a position where you can pass your trauma on again, where you can hurt innocents again, period, right? Now, hopefully there's some room for redemption there. Hopefully, they can find a place in their heart where they can feel some remorse but at the same time, I don't want to risk them hurting another child. On the other side, what if we could take the hundreds of millions of people who are dealing with childhood trauma in some way, who some of them it comes out in low self-esteem or anxiety or PTSD, whatever it is. Some of them it comes out in passing that trauma on. If we could love them and help them before they pass it on, we will save millions of children. So that's what liberating humanity is all about. My social media profiles are all liberating humanity. It's not about Paul Hutchinson. Yeah, you can find me on Paul Hutchinson Official, but it's liberating.humanity. my social, my IG, and my Facebook, all of those things, because that's what my mission is. How do we help people break free from those self-imposed limits, from the anxiety, from the trauma of their past, wash themselves free of that, not define themselves by it, and move on to live a healthy life? That's the only way that we're going to fix this problem.
Let me ask you two questions about that, Paul. So it makes sense, right? The earlier you get to somebody, the better opportunity, whether it's to educate them or to help them deal with some type of trauma, the earlier you get to them, the better outcome they'll likely have. But let me start with the people that you experience when you're doing this undercover work, or that you mentioned Jeffrey Epstein, people who are, grown ass adults, right? They know right from wrong. Doesn't matter what their trauma's been in life. They know you talked about making a decision. You make a decision. They make a choice. They know it's wrong, but yet they do it. And it's something that's so out of character for some, maybe not all. I wonder how many people you look at, and I wanted to ask you that question now that you've got all this experience, you're like, that guy's probably but I'm just wondering, for when they get to a certain age and they know this is so wrong, and it's so different than their persona is on anything else in life. How do you square, in your experience, how do you square that? And then I want to get back to getting them help while they're young.
I think that our biggest enemy is arrogance, ego, pride. And I'm going to say there's so many people who have really big egos and low self-esteem, right? They've got money, they've got everything, they're the king of the world, but they loathe themselves for maybe decisions they made in the past or whatever else, and they feel like they've already crossed that line. In a religious sense, there's so many people that think, well, you know what, I already effed up in that way. I already slept with somebody before I got married, might as well do worse things because I'm already going to hell. This right. Self-judgment it creates this super low self-esteem together with ego and pride and arrogance and big checkbooks. And all of a sudden they start going down a dark road. And the second that we look at another human being as anything other than the divinity within them, we go down a dark road. In pornography, a perfect example. We start looking at women not as the divine feminine they are, but as an object. And when we objectify women and we put them in a place other than who they are, then we can easily start putting ourselves in a position where it doesn't matter what we do to them, or it doesn't matter the pain that we cause, etc.
And does that stroke their ego, or does it help their self-esteem? I'm trying to figure out, if you've got a high ego, low self-esteem, and you choose to do something like this, which master are you serving? In
the end, their self-esteem is lower because they know innately that they're doing something wrong,
right?
From an arrogant standpoint, if you can put your dominance on some other person or whatever else, then that super unhealthy arrogance is something that's going to be inflated even more. Right. And there's a degree of addiction to that kind of just dopamine boost of, look, I'm exerting my dominance in this way, which is it's just sick. It is sick and wrong in so many ways.
That is very, very sick and wrong in very, very many ways. So let's get back to the early help. You mentioned how big the problem is. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 5. I wouldn't say women. 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 5 boys, right? Because this is happening at a young age. Mm-hmm. But these, when are they in a position to, with your organization, when are they in a position to be found or helped? Because there's a whole sort of scare intimidation thing around this too. It's like, hey, don't you ever tell anybody that this just happened. And then the kid's like, how do you find them early enough to do it?
And here's what's sad about that, Mike. The average age of somebody who comes out and admits that they were abused as a child, the average age is 52 years old. That's my age.
Yeah.
Yeah, they hold on to this trauma. They've built their careers. They've raised their children. They're and done so in a place of pain, of dealing with all this stuff. And sometimes it comes out in verbal abuse and anger issues, or lack of patience, or anxiety, depression, PTSD, or physical, verbal, and sexual abuse as well. And so, yeah, that's where it is. If we can catch them in their adolescent years, in their early teens. In fact, the reality is, everybody at some point, it doesn't matter a specific age. There's plenty of 60-year-old uncles that are abusing their their nieces somewhere. Right. So, and they may have not have crossed that line until later. So it's not a specific age group. It's somehow speaking to their hearts and helping them realize, yeah, this is a travesty. This is one of the reasons why we put so much effort into the Sound of Freedom movie, is that we needed to wake up the world as to what really was going on and how big of a problem this is, so that they could all step back and collectively say, okay, what can we do about this? We can't all be, undercover agents and go rescue these kids, but what do we need to do as a society to take away this demand, to fix this problem? Those are the questions we needed people to ask, because nobody was talking about child trafficking at the dinner table. It was too dark of a subject. Mm-hmm. But the light at the end of the tunnel with the rescue, rehabilitation, and reuniting of the children with their families is such a beautiful light that it makes talking about this somewhat palatable.
And let me ask you another disturbing question. I've heard you talk about, and you mentioned it here, some of the strategies that these folks use to recruit. I'll say recruit. And maybe you can address those, but I'm also wondering, with those percentages that you mentioned, 1 in 4, 1 in 5, how often are the parents or the caregivers complicit in getting these children into this for their own benefit, money or whatever?
Take a guess.
A lot, I think, right? Because it's especially if
70% of trafficked children have a familial member involved in some way, either a family member or somebody that is super close to the family that's involved. And a lot of them sleep in their own beds that night. It's scary. People think that the big problem is somebody being snatched and taken to Colombia. No, there is trafficking going on in people's backyards right now. And so, in fact, in Thailand, more than half of the children that we rescued were sold, flat out sold by their own families. But here in the US, it happens all the time, where there's a family member somewhere involved in making money from trafficking people in their family or people in their neighborhood. It happens all the time.
And in this, let's just take South America example. When they're done with these children, what happens to them if they're not saved? If they're not,
yeah, that's a sad one right there. We've had a number of operations where we had rescued children that were being sold for organ harvesting.
I thought that only happened in China, and that happens everywhere. In other words, it's just like you're done.
Yeah. We did a bunch here in the U.S.
In the U.S.
We took some doctors from the U.S. to some areas that were fairly close offshore and did some things there that they believe a lot of those organs were being sold to people here. And I asked this doctor, I said, part of me understands the sick road that people go down, being addicted to more things and the ego thing. I'm starting to see where that demands, where does this demand come from? And he told me this. He said, Paul, do you realize that when a child receives an organ transplant in the US, he said, right now, less than 50% of the time do they have the proper paperwork in place to prove where that came from. He said, now I'm not saying they all are coming from trafficked children and these organ harvesting things. He said, but if you're a wealthy family and you're 25th on the list and your daughter's going to die before then, and you can go to another country and pay a premium to get on the front of the line, where is that money going? Right? And is it really a child that got in a tragic car accident that organ is coming to your child, or is it coming from an operation like this?
Yeah, like a made to order, like we fulfill on demand.
Yeah.
How do you do this? You obviously don't have to be doing this kind of work, right? You're committed to it. That's for sure. And yet every day, it's like, are we really making progress? You talked about that. Now it's okay, let's shift, because we weren't making progress by taking them one at a time or 20 at a time or 100 at a time. And I think it sounds like a really smart shift. I'm just curious, like, it's harder to identify the people that you need to reach now because you can't tie them. And I'm speculating here, so you tell me if I'm wrong, but you can't tie them to someone you've identified as a trafficker, for example. Now you're trying to identify children who could potentially become the demand for, become either abusers themselves or become the demand for this to continue going on.
Back at the time of Abraham Lincoln, it wasn't the guys like me and my teams that were creating the biggest difference. It was people like you, Mike. It was Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was the media of the age. And it created an awareness with good people of what was going on in the South. Mm. And once that awareness happened, they rose up and said, no, not on our watch.
Right.
Today, in fact, back then, Abraham Lincoln, when he met Harriet, he shook her hand. He said, so you're the little lady that wrote the book that started the Civil War. Okay. We're not talking about a civil war here and rising up against the government and all this crap. We're talking about a war on evil. And there are so many good people that are willing to stand up and say, you know what? We're going to do a revolution against trafficking. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do a revolution against whatever this evil is that's happening to our children in our own homes. That's how this problem is fixed. That's the reason we put so much time and money and focus into creating the movie. And we are so grateful that there's a massive movement of people that are standing up and spreading this message, because this is not going to be one with a bunch of former special operators that are out there just rescuing kids. Yes, that needs to continue. And yes, we've got a bunch of great organizations that are killing it. They're doing so good. We have one of our Navy SEALs, former Navy SEALs, runs an organization. They have an average of 30 pedophiles a month that they're taking down. Now, to show you how big of a deal that is, the average pedophile would abuse up to 100 children in their lifetime.
Average 100. Wow.
Yeah, that's what I'm told. I don't, but there's, I don't know if that's an up to or average. Let me get the real numbers on that. But this is what I was told by him, and he said that means that for each one of these guys, we're potentially saving up to 100 children, right? So there's thousands of children that are being saved by pulling these guys off the street. But more than that, we've got to change the mindset. We've got to help people figure out their crap way before it gets to that point. I don't ever want to wait until somebody touches a child, hurts a child, rapes a child to say, okay, now you're going to jail, because now we've got a child that we've got to help rehabilitate the rest of her life, right?
Yeah.
So let's figure out on the chains, our Liberating Humanity, even the Child Liberation Foundation, we've got a broken chain somewhere in our thing, because that's what this is all about. How can we break that chain way before anybody hurts a child? That's what we've got to figure out as a community.
I'd like to ask you a question on my personal experience and get your advice on it. Is that okay?
Yes.
So about 15 years ago, I had one of my employees call me on a Sunday and tell me that he was in jail and he needed help getting bailed out of jail. So I said, of course, I will come up and I will bail you out of jail. I bail him out of jail. What happened? He said, well, I was playing with my daughter and, it got a little rough, and my wife called the police on me and they arrested me. And I was like, okay, that sounds weird. But I continued to help him. I continued to employ him. I continued to pay because he had to find another place to live for a period of time. And, I continued to do all of these things because I cared about this person. He'd been a good person to me. And they got back together, and I don't know what I don't know what's happened since, but I But listening to all of this, Paul, I'm thinking to myself, did I do the right thing? Should I have done something differently? Yeah. So I'm just curious if you have any advice for me on that.
There's a quote. I don't remember all the details of it, but it's the do it anyway quote. People may abuse you, people may lie to you, trust them anyway. People may have made bad mistakes, love them anyway. Mm-hmm. I've done very similar things, Mike. Mm-hmm. I've had people who have done super bad things in their past that I thought, you know what, I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to employ you. Unfortunately, some of those ended up coming back to bite me, wherein people who are scam artists or who hurt other people, there's something from their moral compass that's messed up that ended up making choices as my employee that affected things financially because I allowed them to just run their moral compass and employ the wrong people and whatever else. And so, I've chosen, for me personally in my inner circle, I do judge people according to the fruit on their tree. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to also put systems and programs in place allowing people to get the help that they need, but I'm not going to bring them into my inner circle. So here's the thing. Whether, obviously if they let him out on bail, he didn't rape the child, mm-hmm. maybe, and the justice system, half the guys that are getting arrested really shouldn't be, and half the guys that are out should be in, there's so many challenges that are there. And so for us to just have this blanket judgment across the board and say, well, since you actually spend a day in jail, then you're obviously a really bad person. No, if here's the thing. Every single one of us, there's not one person listening to this program. Every single one of us have effed up in some way in our life, right?
Sure.
All of us have. We've acted at a place out of a lack of integrity in different areas of our life, or we said things that we regretted, or we did things that we regret. Every single one of us have done things that we regret doing. Mm-hmm. And so if you, in fact, the reality is, if you put everybody in jail who has ever, if every single crime against a child, even just verbal and physical abuse, sexual abuse, of every single person that has committed those against children and even other people, if all the abusers were put in prison, we would probably have half the planet in prison. Now, maybe that needs to happen, right?
Right.
But instead, is there a better solution? Right? Is there something that we can do? And in my opinion, Mike, I actually think you did the right thing. Now, if you were enabling him to continue and hurt children, except that's a different story. But it sounds like in his situation, maybe he was, playing rough and whatever else, and his wife was like, "Hey, my opinion is you shouldn't, there's different parents that have different opinions on whether you spank a child or not. Guess what?
Sure.
Me and my sisters, we were spanked. Mm-hmm. Some of us were whipped by a belt and we turned out just fine. Today, you whip a child with a belt, you're going to jail. Right. And so you have to ask yourself, what is moral? What is right? And what do we need to do as a society to help us heal and move forward? But all of us have room for healing.
Well, thank you for indulging me and weighing in on that. I do appreciate it. I've been thinking about it the whole time, this podcast, and I haven't thought of that in many, many, many years. So I appreciate that. So Paul, what is the bright side? What should you mentioned getting the word out? Of course, that I loved how you related it to a revolution, against trafficking. But what's the bright side that you see? What's the bright side in the Sound of Freedom?
So much beauty. So, for example, you can go to liberateachild.org or liberatechildren.org. The Child Liberation Foundation has a lot of different programs specifically designed for healing. In fact, they have a project right now that they are launching called Liberating Wings. And it's not just the wings to make you fly, but they're physical extensions on the safe houses for the children are the liberating wings.
Okay.
And And these liberating wings are specifically designed for healing modalities. So we have a lot of different types of healing modalities that are focused there, because a lot of these places, they barely have enough of a budget for the beds of the kids and a kitchen and whatever else, and some therapists that come in and talk to them in this side room. But if we can have something that they can learn and grow and progress with art therapy, with sound bowl therapy, with different breath work exercises, and a lot of different things that we can do to help them heal through that trauma, that's super beautiful. We also have, through the Child Liberation Foundation, we fund other groups. We've sent a bunch of money to a couple foundations that are helping with the adoption of the children, because if we can put them into a healthy home, that's great. We partner with other organizations such as the Hope of Life Foundation out of Guatemala. Amazing group. These guys, if you have a chance to write a check, if you don't do so to the Child Liberation Foundation, write one to them. These guys have helped over 30,000 victims. And their model is beautiful. They will take these trafficked girls and these children from challenged homes, et cetera, that need to be in foster home. Instead of just having them in a big foster home type of a thing, they will have donors like me and others that will come down and build homes, small, beautiful little homes. They will take families that maybe have one or two kids that can't afford a home of their own, but want to expand their family and be in a safe place. They will say, okay, you've got 2 children. We're going to give you 3 more. We're going to create a situation where these challenged children have a mom and a dad type of an environment, as they have their therapy and their psychologists and stuff that are there that are helping them, but they're then working on the farm community that's there. It's super healthy and very effective in putting these children in healthy homes and bringing in parents and families that need that extra help and a place to live, et cetera. So it's a beautiful model that's working really, really well. They bought about 3,000 acres, continuing to expand. So that's the beautiful light at the end of the tunnel, is the fact that these children can heal. That it does take money, it does take resources to make it happen, but we've got the best of the best that are working together in collaboration. So our collaboration is paying for the foundations that are like these Navy SEALs and Green Berets that are doing the continuing to do the stings, plus identifying people like Hope of Life that are providing this amazing aftercare type of programs, plus finding adoption companies. This is all part of what the Child Liberation Foundation is doing.
Got it. Well, thank you for giving us something to be positive and optimistic about when it comes to this horrible problem. Paul, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you feel is important to or that you want to talk about before we call it a day?
I would encourage everybody who's listening to go watch The Sound of Freedom. It will inspire you. It will motivate you. It will make you cry, but there'll be happy tears as well as the sad tears. And spread that message. And then from there, the next to do is say, okay, what organizations, what foundations do I want to get behind? I'll tell this because this is important. I made a hard separation with a clear separation with the foundation that I started with 5 years ago. The Homeland Security agent who's represented in the movie and the foundation that he represents, we separated 5 years ago.
Okay.
Just different beliefs of where the money should go, where the focus should be, how we needed to focus on the rescues, et cetera. And so I support anybody who's creating awareness. If they're creating awareness, great. Let them run with it. There's no challenges or whatever there. But I will say there are a lot of vetted organizations that are really doing the work, that are pulling these kids out, that are creating the aftercare necessary, that we love and support and have on our list of people that we're donating to.
Okay. And it seems like the only way to tackle a problem that's this significant is to have collaborations with anyone and any group and any government and any NGO and anything where you're aligned on the mission of eradicating this problem and present day and going, back to getting people before they're helping them deal with the trauma before they act upon it.
Yeah. It's a win-win for all of us. We together, Mike, together we can liberate humanity. That's what this is about. That's where this is all going. That's where there's a battle ahead, and we're all going to be deciding what side of it we're on. Are we going to figure out how to release our trauma and step into a place of light and help press this message forward? Or are we going to stick our heads in the sand and pretend like it's not happening?
Right. Well, Paul Hutchinson, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Thank you for making that shift in your life where you decided to commit yourself to this thing that you're uniquely talented to do, it seems like starting in the undercover and then just taking it to a whole nother level. And thank you for making the movie, The Sound of Freedom. Please go see The Sound of Freedom and there's so many great reviews about the movie already. Of course, like we said, it's a top grossing movie in the US last weekend. Phenomenal. That's got to blow your expectations way out of the water, I would think. And I just really appreciate having had the chance to meet you, and thank you for the work you're doing. You've inspired me for sure, and I'm sure you've inspired everyone listening.
Thank you, Mike. Super grateful for your time and excited to continue to collaborate together.
Thank you. And for those of you listening, please act on what you've heard today and do me a favor and maximize the greatness that's within you today and make your future your property, something that you are very proud to own. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the show. And before you go, I just have 3 requests for you. 1, if you like what I'm doing, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on whatever podcast platform you prefer. If you're really into it, leave me a review, write something nice about me, give me 5 stars or whatever you feel is most appropriate. Number 2, I've got a book. It's called Ownership: How Getting Selfish Got Me Unstuck. It's an Amazon bestseller. And I'd love for you to read it or listen to it on Audible or wherever else, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. You can get it everywhere. If you're looking for inspiration that will help you unlock your greatness and potential, order or download it today so that you can have your very own copy. And if you get it, please let me know what you think. Number 3, my newsletter. I do a newsletter every Thursday, and I talk about things that are interesting to me or I give more information about the podcast and the podcast guests that I've had and the experiences that I've had with them. You can sign up for the podcast today at my website, which is my name, MikeMalatesta.com. You do that right now, put in your email address, and you'll get the very next issue. The newsletter is short, thoughtful, and designed to inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you.